So Christina's going to talk through her thoughts and recommendations for an approach, and we really want your feedback as to how you think does it make sense, would it work for you? Right, isn't it?
Yes, thank you, Ali. I'm going to sit down to encourage exchange, but if you can't hear me, please say so, and I'll try and stand up and speak louder or something. I thought I was going to be on after lunch, and I thought, you know, if you're going to make quite a sort of nerdy technical presentation, you ought to start with something a bit informal, a bit shocking to wake people up. So I found this on the Planning Daily, which I thought was quite, as an elderly immigrant myself, I thought was quite shocking. It says Nick Burrows blames old people and immigrants for relaxing planning rules. I thought it was a bit tough. But then I thought, let's look behind it, and what is behind it is a very interesting commons debate. I don't know if any of you pressed the kind of link that went with this image. And it's very interesting because I thought this was a boring, dry subject, but actually the MPs are getting very, very excited about housing targets. This is only a week or two ago. And I just put some things in red which interested me. Many of the MPs participating were the MPs for the areas that you guys work in, which are areas of housing pressure. This one is very worried about there being no standard methodology for assessing future housing needs. He says, how can the government be right and the local authorities be wrong if nobody knows what you're meant to be doing, which I think is a fair question. This one again says the method is complicated. She says consultants come up with all kinds of different numbers, but you only win if you agree with the inspector, and she doesn't think it's very objective. So again, these are the concerns which are very much in our technical, nerdy minds, but also very much out there in the real world. This one really doesn't believe that an econometric model can tell you what you need. And he also asks a very smart question, I thought. He says, people in Cheltenham and also in St. Albans think that the model measures demand, not need. It says that everybody who wants to live in St. Albans, you know, should be allowed to live in St. Albans. And the bit which I didn't copy on the bottom says, well, St. Albans and Cheltenham are really nice places. Naturally, everybody wants to live there. You know, why the hell do we have to put up with all this? So these are very real concerns, which are really very close to the technical core of the modeling. And then Nick Burrows came on. I haven't got the picture of him. I don't know if he doesn't think his looks so good. But I thought the Nick Burrows reply was a very good one, a very interesting one. The first paragraph basically says, I haven't the foggiest notion how this model works. Because Holland went to brief him, so maybe this will no longer be the case after today. But basically it says, it's not really about asking people where they want to be. It's really based on the past migration, that's a definition. Then he says, it's not about people who quite like to live in Cheltenham, it's for people who really want to live in Cheltenham, which I don't think makes it, you know, the good people of Cheltenham look any better, because many people really want to live in Cheltenham. And then he says, especially if they want to be close to their mum who's growing old. So I don't know if John has his mum was growing old in this model, but maybe you should put her in. So the first bit says, you know, I really don't know how this works. The second bit says, I don't care so far as it adds up to the total for the whole country, which is what Neil was raising before. See, basically, not only do I not know, I'm not really that bothered, because what is in favor of these numbers is if you add them up, they come up with the right number, and the right number is pretty solid, actually. And this is a very good point, so it's a theme that I want to keep up, because I think actually that's what it's all about, it adds up. Okay, just very briefly where we are now. There's nothing more important in the development plan than the housing number. You know, there's 50 pages before about sustainability and balancing the needs of this and the other. Nobody reads them. You go straight to page 51, policy H1, and it says we're going to provide for 500 houses a year, and that's really the main bit. But nevertheless, the proposed numbers are failing the examinations all the time. They're being sent back, they're going back and forth. A lot of places are ending up with the old RSS number while they work out what's going on. Some people just take the CLG number, but for reasons we John spoke about, that's not always a robust guide. So I think, you know, we're still in a bit of a mess. A lot of places like the Quorum are going to early review. And they've already started the review, and to me that's a kind of Mr. Micawber thing. He's very, very confident something will turn out. He's happy to report that something will turn out, but it may not do. So, I think I wasn't going to bore you with it. This is for my developer presentation. Sometimes I need reminding. I'm not going to tell you what the NPPF says because you know it. But my point is that what the NPPF is asking for is not being delivered. There is no indication that the technical underpinnings are solid for the moment. We think, it seems to me, working all over the country, that a lot of the problem is technical. Of course there is a political problem. Of course people don't like houses in their backyards. But also technically, it's quite hard to work out what the objectively assessed need is, which I call the OAN to save a bit of breath and words, or how to objectively assess it, or how to turn it into housing targets. Now, people do not know. The new national guidance, has anyone who's not seen? Has anyone not looked at the new NPPG on this? Everyone's seen it. I think it's a great step forward. It's clarified a lot of things. But we didn't think it provides a full toolkit. So we started off just internally and for our own clients to try and provide some technical advice to fill the gap, just say how we're approaching things. And the idea is today to try and share and test some of these ideas. Not only, have we got the right answers, but are we looking at the right questions? Are people puzzled about the same things as we are? So, I'm just going to do this in 5 or 6 bits, and Alice, I'm going to stop at the end of each bit and really ask for comments. The first question is what is this objectively assessed need? What is this need? It's difficult because, needs has many different meanings. It means what you want, what you ought to have, what you can afford, all kinds of stuff. If you look in the NPPG, it says that need for housing is a housing that is needed. Which is true, but doesn't take us much further forward. It's circular. I was taught at school that if you're writing a dictionary, you can't put the word you are explaining also in the definition because you can't understand. So this is not helpful. Now this is a hard one, and I'm not going to argue with this, but through very close reading of the rules, we think that need is effective demand. What I mean by effective demand is the amount of housing that people want and can pay for. They can pay enough for it that if the planning authority provides enough land, it actually is going to be built. So need in this sense is non-planning constrained development. What will happen? What would happen if you let it happen? I very much do not mean just market demand. I also mean subsidized demand. I know subsidies are dirty word these days, but demand that the state helps you pay for. If you read the NPPF, it is actually the only, almost, I've got a qualification in a minute, but it's almost the only definition that makes sense. And the common sense of this is planning should not restrict the total amount of housing that the nation needs and can afford, because you get a lot of welfare, people will be worse off than they have to be, and it will get in the way of economic growth. So this is a kind of sensible definition. Adam very wisely pointed out that the Kirklees inspector doesn't like the words effective demand. And what he says is, it's not quite like that, because we think that you should provide as much land as is needed, and if the developers choose not to build it, well, that's their lookout. I don't entirely agree with that, because projections measure houses that were actually built in the past. They're based on past effective demand. This is what happened before. And also, there's not much point allocating land which nobody's going to build on, because it's sort of counterproductive and inefficient and stuff. However, there is an insight in that which I think is very important. Are there any people here who are kind of mainly economists? No, good, I won't show you this one. I have a point, but it's only for kind of super nerds. Okay. It is to do with effective demand, but it's also something to do with civilized standards of just desserts, or what is called a normative, not an is or will be, but a should be, an ought statement. And I think the thinking there is something like that, that is people have certain standards. You know, we've achieved certain standards of, if you like, civilized well-being. So, John, probably this number is hopelessly wrong. But, you know, if say 80% of married men of age 40 did have their own home with their own family, we don't really, it is not desirable, it's not a good thing for the nation for that percentage to go down and to stop going up. So there's something to do with what is desirable also in there. Similarly for migration, you know, it's something to do with if really people really would like to live in St. Albans. You know, it's fair to give them a fair go, or, you know, if they can't go to St. Albans, well, you know, it's bad luck, maybe they have to go to Hemel Hempstead, but, you know, don't let them stay in Hull, or, you know, London Borough of Highgate, for God's sake. So there is an ought there somewhere, but, you know, it's a bit vague, because in the end, there's no point providing land for houses which are going to be built. Sorry, just before I stop here. This sounds really awfully abstract, and, you know, actually doesn't matter what this name means. And I think it does matter massively, because if you don't have a reasonably clear understanding of what this stuff means, there is no way you can tell what is a good number and what is a bad number. And I want to make this comment that actually, you know, there's very, very controversial, very hard debates in examinations in public and inquiries up and down the land about, you know, hundreds of houses, or land for hundreds of houses, when the margin of error on this stuff is thousands. So, you know, we're already trying to do something very hard, take some very hard decisions. And, you know, you really do need to know whether your number is 1,500 or 2,000, because it makes a huge difference in real life science impact. So I think it's important to define these things very clearly. I'm going to stop here and ask if anybody wants to disagree.
And that's quite a good point, actually, because Keith Holland has just joined us.
It seemed to me that the need of objective assessment is mostly to do with real demand, in the sense that it's what will be built if you let it. And there's a little sideline about how the club is expected to be. But I just wanted to ask whether this is, I was arguing that actually, you know, you need a clear definition of what this stuff is, because if you don't know what it is, you don't know how to count it. And if you don't know how to count it, it's not so just on
how you're approaching needs like that. David?
I think what you said in practice seems to not make sense, but it sort of seems to resonate with how it's being interpreted. So obviously the NPPF doesn't restrict its demand. It talks about need, and I suppose aside from the question of your slightly sort of worrying image that sort of conjures up of everyone moving out of London Boroughs to Hemel Hempstead because they can't get to St Albans, it did leave me thinking about balanced communities and how that fits into it, but perhaps that's a constraint. But you made the point, fairly I think, about effective demand and affordability. And certainly in our case, we were represented, I'm not sure that really came through, and I don't know if it's come through in inspectors' views of basically how much people can afford to purchase in that area. I think it's been around the need and the demographic projections, but it is quite interesting, I think, to look at and just ask the question how you measure what is effective demand as opposed to just demand.
I think that's what the projections try to do, because they are all for, remember what happened in the past, which happened on the back of what people actually could afford. Yeah, but what you're projecting, what you're rolling forward, is the actual households that existed in the actual houses that were built. Because our household and our house are very close on each other. But there are some. So what you are projecting is reality. All I mean by effective demand is reality, is what people could afford, whether in the affordable sector with help, or in the market sector without help. So I mean, that's the thinking. So you can't measure directly what people will be able to afford in 15 years time, because the market doesn't look that much more. So you do your best, but for the next few years, you try and overlay for phasing purposes some other ways of working out what people can afford. Because nothing's perfect, and you try and work it out from different. That's how I see it, but I don't know if that's how say Neil sees it.
Well, David, do you want to come back on that?
So just to come back on that, I can see the sense in it, but one of the measures of effective demand is, and assuming you have a 5-year housing land supply or plus X%, is how many houses are being built. That's a measure of effective demand, I would have thought, but it's sort of rather poo-poo.
Well, I think what he's trying to do is unconstrained by planning effective demand. I think it doesn't work. The projection doesn't work in the short term, because the projection you see on John's thing is like that. Reality is like this. Sorry, I have a picture, but and I think it kind of breaks down. I think for the next few years, you have to look at things more in your way. What people actually can afford, what's deliverable, what are possible delivery rates. Because the projection is never going to tell you how much you can actually sell in 3 years, but it tells you how much you should provide over the long term. And it takes a long time to get a housing site organized. So maybe that's a good way to look at it. Because the gestation period on these things is very long.
Okay, Neil and Rob. Neil?
Yeah. Can I say that Christina is raising a really important point here, and I hope that when she commented on the National Planning Policy Guidance, she told DCLG in words of one syllable.
Nobody else.
This. To put a point in a dramatic way, it's about actually being clear about what you're trying to project or measure for the future. Put it like this. If we were to say it's satisfactory to assume that average household size goes back to where it was in 1960, we can now knock down 5 million homes. It's as blunt as that. The assumption about household formation rates, and household formation rates are 1 over average household size, is absolutely crucial. I did some work with one local authority group, and there was a debate about should they assume that household sizes stop falling, or should they assume that after a bit of a blip it continues to fall on the previous trend. The difference in terms of the number of homes they needed is about 30%, and that sort of number matters. We've got to have some clear guidance. Is it acceptable to assume that it's going to get harder and harder for young adults to form households by themselves or with a partner? That's what the latest projections assume. Is that an acceptable assumption? Demographers can produce numbers to go with any set of assumptions that you decide on, but we need clarity from government as to what an acceptable basis for
Whether it's
planning is.
acceptable or not, if the economy is still in a bad way, this is all people are going to buy anyway. So it doesn't matter how much green belt you give them.
No, but we shouldn't allow ourselves that sort of easy cop-out.
It's not easy, it's pretty unpleasant.
No. But
they can't afford it, they're not going to...
I don't know in what proportion of the country this is true, but for a large part of the country, the price of a house is more than half determined by the value of the bit of land that it sits on. And that value of the bit of land that it sits on is determined by the supply of land that you can build houses on.
Now you're being smart.
Yeah.
I'm going to be really smart.
Frankly, if more land was provided so that the cost of building plots was lower, then we would have a situation where the price was lower and the effective demand, the number of people who could afford to buy a house at the lower price, would be higher.
But the only person sorry.
I don't, because we haven't got that much time, so I don't want to stray off. Let's talk about the numbers rather than the land allocations and things like that.
No.
Rob, did you have a question?
Yeah, just to give you some context first. We in Maidstone are doing a joint schmar with our neighbours Ashford and Tunbridge and Moorland. We share common housing market areas, so that's all good. And I've listened to John a number of times now, and I think the interim figures, the 2011 figures, there's problems with them, but I think they're the best we've got really. So intend to go along with those. But it's my big uncertainty is here speaking to lots of demographers and analysts, and everybody does seem to agree that there is uncertainty, and and I accept that the figures are high in general for the southeast of England. Accept that, but there is this uncertainty, and the further you project into the future, the greater the uncertainty becomes. And I'm not sure if Keith will agree with this, but it seems to me that one can only plan really with any sort of degree of confidence for about 10 years. I used to do demography myself, and the unknown has always been migration. In my day, within the UK, nowadays international migration. That in turn is dependent upon about the state of the economy. In Mason, we've had loads of consultants doing reports on retail, employment numbers, and it's predicting when the southeast of England is going to enter boom times again, which in effect then affects your population numbers. So really, is it really worth planning beyond the 10-year time horizon? I know you would like that, but...
No, but I mean, I think everybody accepts that beyond the 10-year horizon, things get very woolly,
Yeah.
frankly. But nevertheless, taking the point that was made earlier, that actually to bring land forward takes a long time. And if you restrict your planning to 10 years and say we're not going to look beyond that, you might be in a situation where you've actually got a real problem because enough land isn't being identified by planning authorities for the longer term, accepting that that may need to be adjusted, you know, when in 5 years' time, when you monitor and see what's happened over the last 5 years, then you can reach a sensible decision about what you do in your, what was originally your years 10 to 15. So I think it is sensible to actually plan for 15 years, but accepting that beyond 10 years, it's very woolly and very likely to change in the light of what happens in the first 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Christine, should we move on?